knew they did the economy first, the people would back them, and the pressure would encourage them to continue to uh, grow the economy. It was a good strategy and actually helped them out a lot. Uh, Leads to red capitalism because you have a lot of capitalist ideas coming in, but it's still communist. And you have this thing coming up: is it red capitalism? Is it like what's going on here? 1970, 70% of GDP came from state-owned industries. And 94, about 80% all around the board. The resources weren't set by the state; it was actually set by market prices. 2000, state-owned industries were only responsible for about 24% of GDP. There were more private enterprises, and they were able to expand without worrying about the government. And it's not so much that there was a decline in state productivity or industries; it was just that the private sector just grew so fast that it just overtook a lot of the growth. Now, another issue is it's sustainable, all this growth that's going on in China. You have some stuff that happens to China in the last couple of decades. You have Chinese inflation, but it didn't really hurt it that much. It dropped about 1% to about 9% growth those couple years. You have the Asian financial crisis that happened, which slowed a lot of investment into Asia because of everything that was going on. And it dropped some of the growth. Some of the growth going on around the 90s was about 14%, and it dropped about half. And in the 2000s, you see a moderate slowing of about 1%, where it goes from the average is starting to drop from about 10-ish to about 9-ish. But it's still high. There's a little bit of slowing, but it's all kind of relative. It's not really a huge thing. It's just the signs of it going down. But the thing is really, you see high levels of growth and all everywhere. High domestic investment, high savings. It's kind of, they call it the virtuous circle of growth. You have high savings, high investments, leads to high output, high exports, high GDP, which leads to more savings. A couple things about what the sustainability, though, is that there's a high need for more infrastructure for such growth. More power plants, rails, airports, and whatnot. But the thing is, with some of the problems with stability, though, even if the outside market isn't that great, China has a huge potential for increasing its own domestic consumption to sustain its own future growth. Pretty much, you have a lot of people in poor rural areas who have need of things that they don't have access to: televisions, household goods, and stuff like that. And focusing on them, it would be a new market to help sustain growth. Not only that, you have a high rising middle class who just wants to consume, and that's another target area for them to sell more things. Large population results in wealth source of both demand, buyers, and supply, which is non-employed rural people. So if you ever need workers, you have a source of labor. If you ever need buyers, you have the people who need household goods, and you have the rising middle class. A couple of things that were brought up was about flawed measurement, about how they were talking about the Asian growth measured capital per worker, not output. But the fact of the matter is that by the end of the day, China is just so large, it has so many resources, its own domestic market, that it can always sustain its own growth domestically. Some challenges that it faces is the human resource problem. Like many countries going on right now, especially in Asia, is the aging population, where they face an aging workforce that may not be able to work, or a population that can support services for older people. And also they have a low literacy rate. Is about 6%, but when you have 6% of a quarter of the world's population, that's still a lot of people. They face some challenges with the WTO. They were accepted a couple of years ago, but they're still kind of fearful of opening up the markets all the way. There's still some stuff being state-owned and state-run, but there's still some efficiencies, and they kind of fear that they might not be competitive on the foreign market. And so they're going slowly with that and pushing reforms here and there to ensure that the market is successful out in the global society. They also face high unemployment, like I mentioned before, with the rural areas. The problem with high unemployment is that you have a large pool of workers. When you have a large pool of workers, it drives the wages down, which once again lowers domestic consumption. And if you want to depend on your own domestic consumption to continue or sustain your own growth, this is a problem, because if you lower consumption, you lose that market. China depends on economic growth to alleviate unemployment. Excuse me. There's also social constraints. There's this fear of things that can happen from having capitalism, crime. They have some myths thinking that more crime will rise, corruption. They see certain things where economic reforms will allow more people for extortion, profiteering, corruption within the government itself. And with all that, they feel that there might be that the social fabric of China could be in danger, and it could undermine the authority of the CCP. And one of the largest problems they have, or the second largest, I guess it's equal to the next one, is the income disparity. Like they just grow so fast that they have such a rising number of rich, but they still have a large number of poor as well. And also with the hukou, it restricts the movement from rural areas to the cities, which helps to keep slums and from growing in cities, but at the same time, it limits the opportunities that poor people or people with lower incomes. It lowers their opportunities to get better jobs and better income and whatnot. And then another large problem they have is the environment. With them growing so fast, there's been a lot of pollution, a lot of dependence on burning fossil fuels, which has been creating smog, a lot of pollution to waterways from chemicals seeping out from factories. They depend on underground water and is being over extracted. But they are approving a lot of different things. They have been to a lot of different conferences where they are trying to improve a lot of what would you call it? Stuff coming from factories. They want to reduce pollution from factories by 20%. Smog, or just reduce inefficient coal factories, coal burning. They are also working on introducing scrubbers, desulfurization facilities. They're just trying to clean up all the factories and all the power plants that will make sure everything's better. They were aimed to reduce energy consumption by 20% of the GDP. And they're putting a lot of things forward to make things better now. In the past, China's always been about growth first, clean up later, but they are starting to see that they can't sustain their growth and they can't sustain the population if they continue to keep it dirty like that. So they are putting a lot of reforms to make things better. And that's the end of my presentation. Hope you guys enjoyed.